like, if you love the NFL the way that I do, and I'm guessing a lot of people in our audience do because the NFL's the best and this is a sports show and the NFL is the best sport in my estimation, then I'm sure you are familiar with the content from our guest at this time, Conor Orr, senior writer for Sports Illustrated covering the National Football League. And if you are not, I would highly recommend you follow Conor on Twitter. Conor with one N, Conor Orr, his work over at SI. You can hear him on Heed the Call with Mark Sessler and Dan Hanzus, which is an Odyssey podcast. He was on the Athletic Football Show podcast last week with Robert Mays. I listened to it. Like, it's great. If you love the NFL, and not that it's only minutia, but I swim in the minutia. And if you like that stuff, then you need to be following Conor. If you like the NFL, you should follow Conor's work. Thanks for joining me, my man. How's it going on this Tuesday?
It's great with an intro like that. You could just keep going. I'll just stand here. This is awesome.
Yeah, I know. No, I'm a fan, so I love having you here on the show. And your work covering all the coaching vacancies has been great. So I'll ask you about a couple of the vacancies that remain open, but I'd love to get your opinion on the two, Conor, that were filled last night, basically like during the national championship game or right before it. Let's start here with the Miami Dolphins and Green Bay Packers former defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. Your opinion on that hire, did it surprise you, etc., Hafley to the Miami Dolphins?
I think once the Dolphins went with John Eric Sullivan as their GM, I think this was probably the most down the middle, down the fairway hire that they could have made, because they're resetting the entire operation in Miami. They were so broken from a disjointed personnel and coaching standpoint for years and years and years that they kind of just needed to get two guys on the same page that think alike and that see a team the certain way. Hafley will bring that defense up to a floor that it hasn't had in a long time. And I think just calling him a defensive coach is a little bit of a misnomer. He was a head coach at Boston College, got a lot out of a team that it's really hard to recruit at. I mean, brought Zay Flowers there, got him to stay at Boston College while he was there. So I think Hafley is one of those program guys. I'd initially pegged him for the Giants long before we thought John Harbaugh was going to come here. So I thought it was a really good hire.
I kind of look at it, Conor, and say, I don't know how it's going to go for Jeff Hafley, and I don't think we're going to know how it's going to go until like a year or two in. And I'll ask you about Saleh in a second. And what I said earlier in the show is, I think we'll know if like Robert Saleh is going to do well in Tennessee like this year. Like, if it's a disaster this year, I think we're probably going to know this isn't going to go great. It may take a couple years before we know what's going to happen with Hafley in Miami. Do you agree with me that this is, in my estimation, it doesn't have to go this way, right? It feels to me like they are at the beginning of like what could be a pretty long rebuild with the Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, I would go as far as to say I think we might know if the Saleh hire is a good hire by the end of this week, depending on who he lands as his offensive coordinator, right? I mean, seriously, I mean, you could get Mike McDaniel in there. You could get Clay Kubiak in there. And I don't know, either of those names right now I think are under strong consideration, certainly. And that would be such a field day for Cam Ward. I know that Saleh really likes Cam Ward. And I heard that from a couple of teams in this process that he came in with individualized offensive coordinator plans for every team that he interviewed based on their personnel. They were really impressed with his ability to handle the offensive side of the ball. And I think we can throw out that Jets tenure because it's chaos for everybody. So I think this was a great hire for Tennessee. And like you said, Hafley, like this whole roster needs to get pulled up by the roots. And I think McDaniel almost had Brian Dable syndrome where he was too good too early. The team never had to rebuild. And then you ended up stringing it out for far too long.
What is your best guess, and this can be a guess, pencil, not pen, who Robert Saleh's offensive coordinator will be in Tennessee working with Cam Ward?
I would say, again, the short list is probably someone like Mike McDaniel, someone like Clay Kubiak. And let's not forget also that Matt Nagy interviewed for this head coaching job. And it was a couple years ago when the Broncos hired Vic Fangio as their head coach. The runner-up to that job was Mike Munchak. They were both, I think, staying in the same place while the interviews were taking place. And then Elway ended up just hiring both of them to be on the coaching staff. So if they really liked the way that Matt Nagy had a plan for Cam Ward, why not? Because Nagy's contract has expired with the Chiefs. They've already replaced him with Eric Bieniemy. So he is a free agent and able to be hired.
It's something interesting to think about, and just like Mike Munchak and Vic Fangio, like both great like position coaches, and Fangio, one of the great defensive coordinators, maybe not the best consideration to be head coaches in the NFL. So, Conor, I'm not surprised that the Buffalo Bills fired Sean. And this doesn't have to be like, are you surprised by it? I actually thought this was a couple years like past due for McDermott to go in Buffalo. I think he'll get another job. We can talk about that. But let's talk about the Buffalo Bills vacancy here, which obviously goes near the top of the list here for the chance to work with Josh Allen. What are you hearing right now? What is your sense as to what Brandon Beane may do now in Buffalo with the next head coach of the Bills?
So here's one interesting name that kind of came on my radar immediately after this happened, and that's Davis Webb, who's the passing game coordinator for the Denver Broncos. Davis Webb is 30. He played with Josh Allen, and he was a hit in Buffalo. They got along really well, has done incredible work with Bo Nix in Denver, and is catching on in a lot of these places. I talked to Cliff Kingsbury about Davis Webb, and he said, if I ever have a son that's playing quarterback, he's only playing for Davis Webb. So a lot of high marks from coaches around the league. And the other name that you're hearing for the Bills coaching search here is Brian Daboll, which is interesting because Davis Webb last played for Brian Daboll. And I think that there is maybe not a coincidence there that maybe Daboll comes in as Webb's veteran OC or some version of the other way around. So I think those are two names that you got to watch early in Buffalo.
Just your opinion. Would you like either of those hires for the Buffalo? And I'm on record saying, like, I don't care who they hire. You need someone different to try and get them over the hump. Just your opinion. Would you like either of those hires for Josh Allen?
I think that ultimately, like, and it's not a direct comp, but how good Aaron Rodgers was when he was in Matt LaFleur's offense, and you finally got him to play in structure and something that made sense for him schematically. Josh Allen needs that, because how many times have we seen him just try to be Superman or need to be Superman? And not that they don't have an offense, but a lot of it just falls away in the fourth quarter and is dependent solely on Josh Allen. So if you could get him into a system that kind of relies on the best and leans on the best of the things that he can do and makes him consistently comfortable, I think we can tap something that we haven't seen in probably the last 5 years that he has of his prime. And you can get a better defensive coordinator, because that's the thing. We keep hiring good offensive coaches over and over and over again. There's just a stacked pool of good defensive coordinators out there that the Bills could hire who could do as good or if not a better job than McDermott. So I actually think this is not one of those jobs where it's impossible to replace him. I think anybody's going to be pretty good. It's a low floor position for sure.
And I think that's such a fascinating sea change this year, where think about the two guys that got hired yesterday, both defensive coaches, and like a lot more defensive coaches potentially on the docket, maybe bucking what's been a long-standing trend of young offensive coaches in the NFL. Conor Orr with us here. You better you bet. Nick Costos, Westwood One Sports from Sports Illustrated, on Twitter at his name, at Conor Orr. Will Sean McDermott get a coaching job this offseason in your estimation, Connor? And if so, what do you think the most likely place would be?
So I think the most likely place would make it true that he's not going to get a head coaching job this cycle, right? So immediately when Sean McDermott was let go, I thought, what great news this is for the Arizona Cardinals, who were on the fence about firing Jonathan Gannon. They did, I think, in part because they thought there were only going to be a couple vacancies and they'd get a good candidate. And then all of a sudden the carousel blows up. There's 10 openings and you're sitting at the bottom of the totem pole. But I think that should have been their first move, is to call Sean McDermott yesterday. I don't know if Sean McDermott would go there. And I think Sean McDermott's probably best suited to wait a year, sit out, especially since the Titans did not give him the courtesy of bringing him in. There were some Andy Reid connections in that job that he just wasn't able to play at the last minute. So I think McDermott's probably best served sitting out a year, and that's kind of what I expect him to do.
It's wild how things can change over the course of a couple of days in the National Football League. Two of the other big teams with vacancies right now, both in the AFC North, obviously, right? The Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. What are you hearing on those two? And I'm on record saying I think Brian Flores should be the head coach of one of those teams. What are you hearing right now as it concerns the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens?
So Mike Tomlin told me last year the best head coach, or the best coach without a head coaching job in the NFL, is Brian Flores, and it's not even close. I think if his word matters on the way out, I think Brian Flores gets heavy consideration. I still am interested. Okay, the transfer portal window is closing. Do we at least get a little, do we fly out to South Bend and just see what Marcus Freeman is thinking, give him one more chance to take this job? I just think he was built in a lab to be the Steelers head coach. But if we're looking at short lists here, I would certainly say that you have Flores in Pittsburgh, Chris Shula in Pittsburgh, and maybe an outside shot at Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. And you're looking at maybe Jesse Minter in Baltimore if I had to put in a pencil guess right now.
And Minter's, I think, is interviewed with every single team that had a vacancy, right? Like, he's someone, the Chargers defensive coordinator, who you think will get a job in this cycle?
Yeah, one industry source put it to me this way, right? Like, he's the only one that got a clean sweep on the bingo card, right? So every single team that had a vacancy immediately requested him the moment he became available. That's usually a historical indicator that he's going to walk away with one of these jobs.
I think I know what your answer to this question is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is Curt Cignetti going to get a look from any NFL teams here following winning the national championship with Indiana?
I don't think so, but why wouldn't he? Like, and I posted this a couple weeks ago. If you're an NFL team watching him demolish Oregon and Alabama and beating Miami in the national championship game, I would hope at the very least that you are in that building at some point, just asking him how on earth he did that in 2 years, because that is the most phenomenal head coaching job, full stop, that I've ever seen in the sport of football. It's unbelievable. That said, there are names like Chandler Whitmer, who's on that staff in Indiana, and Chandler Whitmer's with the Falcons the year before, I believe, as a pass game coordinator. I think we might see a slow creep of some of those Cignetti assistants into the NFL, especially guys who have had NFL ties before, because there's no doubt that people are curious about what's going on there. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Couple more minutes with Conor Orr from Sports Illustrated. Tom Brady, John Spytek, and the Las Vegas Raiders. Let's take Cignetti out of the equation and say that he's not a candidate. We think they'll draft Mendoza first overall. Where do you think the Raiders are leaning right now?
So I think that there's a couple interesting possibilities for the Raiders. You look at that combo of Davis Webb and Cliff Kingsbury, possibly if he doesn't get the Buffalo job, I think that he might be a potential fit there. You look at Vance Joseph, who they also interviewed, I think, who could be a potential fit there. And you also look, and I've been saying this and I've been thinking it more and more. The Pete Carroll thing was one and done, and Nick Caserio in Houston built the foundation of that roster through 2 one and done hires that you can say whether they were made on purpose or not, they were so bad that they gave them so many bites at the apple at the top half of the draft that it built the foundation of this really good roster. So if you're Tom Brady and you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, my guy isn't out here this year, what's the worst thing that can happen? I'll sign him to a short-term contract like I did with Pete Carroll, fire him again after another year, pick in the top 5 again, and then we'll be ready to roll with a candidate that we really like the next year.
What's Antonio Pierce up to?
Yes, bring him back.
Is David Culley available to come coach the Las Vegas Raiders next year? My last one, unless something else flits into my brain here. I'm going to be honest, man. Now, I'm happy as a Giants fan with the John Harbaugh hire, especially if Todd Monken comes over. I'm going to be absolutely thrilled. I wanted Kevin Stefanski. I know a lot of people, look at his 1-loss record. Okay, he was coach of the year twice. The owner brought Deshaun Watson in. I like Stefanski a lot. Retain Jeff Ulbrich, which I think is an absolute no-brainer. Did a great job last year with the Falcons defense. And I don't know if you saw this because it literally came down within the last half hour. The Falcons just named, not Brian, but Bill Callahan, Brian's dad, their offensive line coach. I look at this Falcons staff in that division, and I know it's early. I think they're going to win the NFC South. This is a great coaching staff for Atlanta. You share my optimism for the Falcons?
100%. I mean, I had one coaching source tell me years ago, there is your offensive coordinator hire, there's your defensive coordinator hire, and then it's, can you get Bill Callahan to coach the offensive line, right? I mean, those are kind of the order that it goes. He's been one of the most revered position coaches in the NFL, especially at that spot. Maybe him and Jeff Stoutland and the Eagles are the 2 best offensive line coaches in modern NFL history. The way that he's able to take a unit and explain the intricacies of blocking in this numbered system that he has is fascinating. And it hits the ground running. It allows even kind of your worst offensive lineman to catch up really quickly. And so I'm in full agreement with you. That is the best assembled staff in the NFL, new staff in the NFL right now. Now, if Harbaugh can get Monken on board, if he can nail the defensive coordinator hire, I think you're close. But what have the Giants needed all along? They've needed offensive line help. And I think that Callahan was kind of that big free agent on the market that a lot of people were hoping to draw.
I think Anthony Weaver would be my choice if the Giants could get him to be the defensive coordinator. Last one here, hard 30 seconds for the answer. Now, I consume your content. I know who all these guys are. But for our listeners and viewers, give us one name that people don't know that could be a head coach in this cycle in 30 seconds.
Nate Scheelhaus is the passing game coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams, former Illinois quarterback. He was on Matt Campbell's staff at Iowa State and was so good as a running backs coach that they basically named him the heir apparent when Matt Campbell was going to get another Power 5 job. He got plucked by the Rams, and he's been on the fast track ever since. I think he could be a dark horse for this Cleveland job as well.
Yeah, or Grant Udinsky, right, who's the offensive coordinator in Jacksonville to pair with Jim Schwartz. You could tell I know this stuff because I consume Conor's content. At Conor Orr on Twitter, Sports Illustrated, heed the call. Check out his episode on the Athletic podcast. It was great. My friend, great to have you on the show. Hope we get to do this again.
Anytime, Nick. Appreciate it, man.